be joined by the mayors of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas, Mayor Ken McClure from the city of Springfield, Mayor Lyda Crewson from the city of St. Louis. We also have the police chiefs of the city of St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, and Columbia Police Department with us, as well as the presidents of the Springfield and Columbia Chamber of Commerce and the Kansas City and St. Louis business community. Because we know that the recent spurt of violent crime in our cities affects not just our tourism, not just our business climate, the ability to recruit and retain employees and attract new businesses. We also know that crime doesn't stop at the city limits. And that's why, while all the challenges of our cities may be different, we know that now more than ever it's important that we're united on common sense strategies to work together to solve the violent crime in the state of Missouri. Our discussion today and over the last couple months has really been focused on three main areas, and then I'll invite the individual mayors to speak as well. Those three main areas that we have been focused on are witness security, making sure that our law enforcement officers have the ability to safeguard those witnesses both at the scene of the crime, but also leading up all the way to the trial for that offender, so that we can provide that positive reinforcement that when you see something, you say something, you work with law enforcement, and that helps us bring convictions. The second issue, of course, is mental health and substance abuse treatment. We know that shooting victims are more likely to be shooters in the future. We also know that the traumatic impact of violent crime has a tremendous impact not only on that victim, but also that victim's families for generations to come. And we want to make sure that we have early intervention with those crime victims. Our third area of discussion has been in the area of keeping firearms out of the hands of children, except for hunting purposes, as well as keeping guns out of the hands of violent offenders. And we want to work on some common sense reforms in our state statutes that really give cities and municipalities and prosecutors the tools they need to keep guns out of the hands of violent offenders. So with that, let me introduce our chair of this effort, Mayor Ken McClure from the city of Springfield. Mayor.
Good afternoon, and first let me thank Mayor Treese for hosting us here in Columbia. We're grateful to be here. We started off a few weeks ago trying to create a forum in which we could have a very candid set of discussions about problems of violent crime, what that leads to, how we might best address those. We know that each community has different problems, but we also have some common elements in these. Crime knows no geographic boundaries, as was indicated. It is also not a partisan issue. So as Mayor Treese indicated, we're focusing at this point on the three issues which have sort of risen to the top right now. We're going to be continuing to talk about how best to flesh those out, if there's cost involved, what kind of legislation that might be required. And so we want to be able to speak as one voice on these, recognizing that we do have individual needs in our communities. And so certainly each mayor is bringing that to the table. The discussion has just been very, very good, and I'm so pleased to be a part of that. Thank my colleagues for their efforts on this as well.
Let me introduce the mayor of St. Louis, Lyda Crewson.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I think it's been very productive for the mayors of the four largest cities to come together to really attempt to address the violence that we have in our communities. Missouri has been leading the headlines with increases in violence crimes, and our largest cities have all ranked way too high in the rankings. And so we are attempting to come together and find those subjects where we believe we might be able to have an impact with the legislature to help us reduce violent crime in our cities and across our state for the health and the welfare of our people. This is really about the residents of Missouri and how to keep them safe. And so we've come together. You've heard about the three initiatives that we're talking diligently about. I think this holds great promise. I continue to believe that it is historic for the mayors and the police chiefs of our four largest cities to come together to really figure out those things that we can all agree on and attempt to move forward on. So I'm very encouraged by this process and appreciate all of you covering that.
It's my honor to introduce the mayor of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas, who's been a leader at the local level already in the last few months on moving the needle to address violent crime in Kansas City, Mayor.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Mayor. It's an honor to be here in Columbia, and it's an honor to be with these folks. I was sworn into office on August 1st, and almost immediately I had a chance to have conversations with my peers here, and I think what we have all said was that this level of violent crime that we deal with, particularly when you see how it impacts young people, is wholly unacceptable. And the reason this group was convened was because we said, as mayors, we want to make a difference. We don't just want to necessarily ask others or wait for others to act. We wanted to see what we could do, working with folks from throughout the state to try to make some key and impactful difference. All of our cities are leaders in a number of different ways for the state of Missouri. What we don't want our cities to be are leaders in violent crime. Instead, we want our cities to be leaders in finding solutions for it. So I think these mayors, the governor's office, the governor himself, has been part of our conversations. We've talked to the leaders in the state legislature, and we look forward to getting our hands around this problem and solving it so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, hopefully a year from now, all of our communities are safer, and you're not reading headlines about homicides and crime increases. Instead, you're hearing about the positive stuff that we do each day in all of our cities. So I look forward to more conversations. Although this is our third meeting, it always feels like this is just a first step in what's going to be our continued marathon to make sure we solve this issue. Because what we will never do and what we will never say is that this level of violent crime is acceptable. We will never look at grieving parents, grieving relatives, and say that's something that just happens in any one of our cities. Instead, we're going to make a difference, and I'm proud of this group, and I think we have made a difference and will continue to do so.
Mark, any questions?
I'm good. You guys?
Anybody else?
From this meeting, or from the last meeting to this meeting, what progress has been made?
Well, we're fortunate as mayors to have leaders of the legislature. Look, Senator Rowden is the Senate Majority Leader in the Missouri State Senate. Mayor McClure has both the Speaker of the House and the Vice Chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. We have leaders, as Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee has Kansas City in his district, and so I think all of us have been gathering the input necessary. I think bringing the Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, Columbia business community to join us at the table and join us in this effort is a tremendous asset that can help us communicate the impact of this, not only on victims and their families, not only on law enforcement officers and first responders, but on our business climate, because we want to make sure that our respective cities and the state of Missouri continue to shine when it comes to recruiting new business, retaining the best and brightest employees, and frankly, making sure that people feel safe in their communities.
So what you're saying is that you brought in some business owners into the meeting today?
We brought the leaders of our respective business communities, so the Columbia Chamber of Commerce, the Springfield Chamber of Commerce, Civic Progress in St. Louis, the Kansas City Civic Progress in Kansas City, here to join us in this effort to help us communicate with our elected officials the impact that violent crime has across our communities.
Let's do 2 more questions.
Thanks, John.
Guys, I'd like to touch on trying to take the firearms out of the hands of children. That's noble, but it sounds to me like more gun regulation, and is that not something the legislature has been in opposition to the past few years?
Well, we're not talking about gun regulation. We're talking about common sense gun reforms, and we each have our ideas that we bring to the table on that. And I can tell you here in Columbia, for the individuals that were arrested in the month of September, a majority of them, more than half, had some prior gun-related offense that 3 years ago, prior to permitless carry in the state of Missouri, would have been prohibited from carrying a gun. And if we can give prosecutors the tools that they need to be able to compel that defendant to forfeit their right to carry in exchange for a misdemeanor, in exchange for a plea bargain, I think that keeps our entire community safe. And we've been putting a lot of ideas on the table to try to find something that is politically viable, publicly sustainable, and that makes an impact in our communities.
If I could just add to that, we need to give the tools to our law enforcement in order to help keep children and adults safe in this community. And I think it's not widely known that it's okay for a 12, 13, or 14-year-old to be carrying a gun. And I don't think most Missourians think that is an okay thing unless that child is going hunting. And so those are the kinds of things that we're looking at to clarify in the law, to give law enforcement, our police departments, our sheriffs, the tools that they need in order to keep us safe. Last question?
Anybody else?
For mental health and substance abuse, I think those things would require more treatment centers and more money. With budgets already thin, how are we gonna come up with funding for those items?
That's a key item. One of the things we want to look at are community initiatives, community substance abuse initiatives, community mental health initiatives. In Springfield, we're working on a partnership with our Borough Health Center, for example. And we're going to try that as a pilot to see what we can do to be able to start that. If that works locally, we believe that it will. That would be a great model for the rest of the state.
I'll add, we're already paying the price of not having enough mental health services and not having enough drug treatment services. So we are paying a price. And so I think it will make all of us safer and make the people we care about healthier and able to lead more productive lives if we're able to have mental health services.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.